Hey, well, good morning, everybody. Hey, guys, it is Jeff DeVerter here, I am the Chief Technology Evangelist here at Rackspace Technology, and welcome to our live stream. Now, today's going to be a pretty exciting day. I've got great guests for you. Taylor Bird's going to join. Of course, he's my partner in crime here in the office of the CTO. And also, we're trying out a little bit of a new format, but I want to remind you to introduce yourself down in those comments below. We really do want to make this an interactive session. But as part of this, hey, Philip's back. Glad you're here, Philip. But as part of this, we're also changing up just a little bit of how we do the format here at our live sessions. And so in today's session, we will be doing get all these buttons straight. So the 4 sections you see here, this is what our new format is. It's going to start with the news. What is happening in the cloud in the news today? That's that first segment. And there's some really interesting things going on. Secondly, we're going to talk about what's new specifically from the cloud providers. What releases have there been in the last week? I know it's hard to keep up with it all, but that's our job. And we're going to do it for you here today. And then we have Kent Kingery. Now, I know if you're paying attention to how we've done this in the past, Kent's been on a lot. And then you know that if you're watching the Rackspace feed, that we told you Eric Johnson, my good friend Eric Johnson, actually Kent's good friend Eric Johnson as well, was supposed to be on from AWS to talk serverless. I got an early morning phone call from Eric, and he is sick. I don't think he's got the bad thing, but he's not feeling well. So he will be back with us next week. So Kent is here to fill in. And then lastly, what's on your mind? So as we're going through here, think of what you want to ask us. It could be a question for Kent or for Taylor or myself, or maybe one of the topics that we cover here today. So have those questions in mind, and we will discuss them. All right, so let's get into the program here. So first up in the news is some news from Microsoft. They had a really rough week, and it started with the Azure service known as Cosmos DB. Cosmos DB, there was an issue that was found end of last week that actually it was what was referred to as the cybersecurity firm Wiz as an unprecedented critical vulnerability. And what it did ultimately was give hackers access to, really, if they could exploit this issue, they had access to every database inside of Cosmos DB. They had access not just to read that content, but to write to that content and even to delete that content. This was not a good day. Now, Microsoft, to their credit, when they learned that there was this issue over the weekend, patched it all up, made it all better. But they have encouraged that any users of Cosmos DB that they would go out and change their security on their primary keys or anything that you've got in Azure. In fact, what a lot of these security firms now are also recommending is you change all of your passwords and such inside of Azure in case anything got anywhere else. All right, so sad for Microsoft, but I'm glad that they got that issue fixed up. Now, this is going to tie to the third article I'm going to talk to, and that is, even though it was announced on Friday, the question in my mind is how much did that information get peddled around the black market, the dark web, before it was actually made known to Microsoft to fix? All right. Well, let's take a little different topic, and that is our friends over at Wyndham Hotels and Resorts. They had an announcement. Actually, I think it was the end of last week, beginning of last week, and that was they did a very public press release with AWS that they are their strategic cloud provider moving forward. Now, they've been very much utilizing that platform, committed to the AWS platform. But you ask me, why is this news? Well, I'll tell you why it's news, and it kind of feeds into the whole cloud mindset. And that is, why choose just a single cloud vendor to have as a primary cloud provider? Well, there's huge value, I believe, in committing your resources to a single platform. It allows you to really just have a single set of developers to work on that environment, single business relationship to deal with. Now, I know they've got other secondary relationships should they need to make a change in the future. You never want to have 100% of your eggs in one basket, but it's I think there's a lot of value in it. You see it also in firms like Capital One, who are very public about their commitment to the AWS platform and that platform only. All right. The CIO, over at Wyndham is a gentleman named Scott Strickland. Now, Scott has been on the Cloud Talk podcast. In fact, it's one that came out just this week. And we go through some of these decisions about how they committed to just a single platform. But we also talk about Scott's entire career. It's really an interesting discussion. And I hope you'll go over to either rackspace.com/solve and listen to that podcast, or even go wherever you find your podcasts at Google Play or at Apple Podcasts or Spotify, any of those places, you'll find Cloud Talk. Now, I mentioned before when we were talking about the security issue over at Microsoft, and that is, how long was that vulnerability known and passed around not only just the dark web, but even government agencies? Well, I listened to a new podcast this week, and from a gentleman, and he interviewed, it was just a fascinating interview with a woman named Nicole Perloff. Now, she is a New York Times writer, been there about 10 years covering cybersecurity. And her new book is called This Is How They Tell Me the World Ends. And she is making the rounds in podcasts and talk shows and the like. And I would just really encourage you, if you are somewhat interested in cybersecurity, this is a great book to open your eyes to the impacts of cyber security wars that are actively going on right now. Now, I say, if you're interested in cybersecurity, you should do this. Now, if you're not interested in cybersecurity, you absolutely should go and check out this book, simply because you need to open your eyes to a little bit more of what's actually going on. All right, so that's our section on what's happening in the news. Let's talk a little bit about cloud releases. Now, one of the new releases from AWS is Backup Audit Manager. Now, this is kind of interesting. Now, everybody's had backup capabilities in their clouds or private clouds, but to be able to audit actually what happens speaks very much to those workloads that are compliance driven. And so I think this is a really huge step forward to be able to make this a service, to be able to meet those compliance and regulatory needs. They've also announced that they've got a level 1 security rating now and competency for their MSSP partners. And so that's anybody providing security services on top of AWS. So raising the bar not only on compliance, but also on their ability to do ratings on security. Now, over in Azure, they've got a public preview on applying settings using Azure Policy for their guest configurations. This is great because now it just, for those workloads that haven't necessarily done the transformation, those VMs that you pull into Azure, you now have the ability, without having to log into the machine through policy settings, to be able to set environments and set that environment up the way you need it to run, so that you can now completely script or get even closer to scripting those VM-based deployments. Sphere OS saw an incremental update. Really, it's just bug fixes, but it's great to see the commitment to the OS and to the platform for those workloads utilizing Sphere OS. Also, they've expanded their high trust over in Azure all the way out through all 51 Azure regions. Can you imagine 51 Azure regions? But high trust, again, going back to compliance, security, those workloads that require that, think government, think healthcare, specifically. So those are some areas that see some great benefits from it. Now, over in Google, they've got an appliance in preview for transferring huge amounts of data up into a storage environment up inside of Google. Now, this is great for cameras and other sorts of offline environments that are just capturing that data, and a way to easily transmit that up then into GCP. So that's in preview. They also have topic retention now in their PubSub environment. It's now made general availability. That was released earlier this year, I believe, in preview. But now you can go back and actually see what happened over time in that PubSub environment, helping to drive workloads that utilize that and give, again, greater compliance in a lot of ways. Now, Vertex predictions are now supported and now supports private endpoints for online prediction. Now, this is through VPC peering. Private endpoints, they provide increasing security for low latency models when serving those ML models. So this is huge for those data workloads that are driving predictive outputs inside of GCP. All right, folks. So now it is my great pleasure to take us kind of to that second segment where we now get to, or third segment, really, where it's bringing in our guest, where I have the distinct pleasure of bringing in Kent Kingery. And ooh, look, we went all white. That's exciting. Got to turn that button off. Still getting the hang of some of this stuff over here. Here we go. That's not Kent either. I don't know where Kent went. We'll find him. I know where he is. He's right there.
Here
So there's Kent.
Wow.
Kent's been on the show several. I hear him back there.
I look like that guy over there.
You do look. You do generally resemble that guy. So let's get Taylor in here. Let's get Kent in here. And our topic of the day is to talk about serverless transformations. But before we do that, now you guys are doing a fantastic job there in the chat of telling us where you're coming in from. So what I want you to also now start to think through is, what are those questions for what's on your mind? Because that's coming up. But continue to let us know that you're out there and where you're coming in from. But let's just open mic between the three of us here for a second. There was all sorts of news in there. There's all sorts of announcement. Anything catch your mind, Taylor, in any of those that you want to maybe just editorialize on real quick? Or Kent, either of you can jump in.
It's early for me to win a spot like that, Jeff.
It is. It's so Taylor joins us from the West Coast, so it's a little early for him.
Yeah. No, I honestly, Jeff, for me, I'll be quite candid. I was looking at an article or two that hit my desk right before about the Cosmos DB leak. Right, I was looking for updates there, so I got a little distracted. That one, we talk every week. We talked last week around security, and every single week it seems, without trying, we've got a security article. So outside of the exciting new releases, that's really caught my eye and kind of distracted me on a couple of articles about what's happening in that world. So it just continues to be amazing, continues to raise the prevalence of why this is so important, and we've got to watch out. So that's where my mind's at.
Well, since Jeff, you were saying, if you're thinking about security, then this, and if you're not thinking about security, and the first thing that came to my mind was you should be.
That's right.
I mean, if security is not on your mind every single day, every hour, with every component of the systems that you're building, then frankly, you're doing it wrong. So
that's right. And that's why I recommend that book from Nicole Perloff. Fascinating. I just discovered it over the weekend, went down the rabbit hole of course, I bought the book. I haven't read it all the way through yet, but it tells amazing stories. I don't think we actually realize how, what's actually happening on that cybersecurity area. One of the things that really caught my attention, and you'll hear all sorts of stories in that book, or go listen to the Jordan Harbinger podcast. She was on there. That was the one that I listened to. And when these zero-day exploits come about, we hear about them, and then everybody jumps to patch. Well, those things have existed for a good long time, and there is a very, very rich black market of government agencies buying those. In fact, the government agencies that fall under the heading of USA kind of fits into there as well. And the going rate for one is between $2.5 and $3 million. And then that's how long.
I think we're in the wrong business, gentlemen.
I think we're in the wrong business. All right. So security, you should care about security. Go get Nicole's book. It's on Amazon. It's in all of the places. Read it and then come back. Maybe we'll have a book study club one day here on the podcast.
I'll tell you one other thing I like about this segment, Jeff, is especially the pieces where you're showing the new announcements. I love the fact that it demonstrates over and over again that all of the cloud providers are continuing to up the game. They're continuing to release new features. They're continuing to make new capabilities. I mean, to me, this is, I keep thinking every year I'm going to get out of IT altogether. And every year there's just more stuff to do. So I love that segment.
Thanks. I'm really excited because even though there's still new stuff coming on, there really isn't anything that any business couldn't envision they want to do with technology today that couldn't be done today. I mean, there's new stuff coming, but it all can be done, and it can be done at scale. All right. And one of the ways that happens is through serverless transformation. We should define, what is serverless transformation? Taylor, what does that actually mean? You've been living this world with a lot of very public customers these days. So what is that?
Yeah. So, wow, ask me to define serverless transformation. I think everyone's aware. If not, serverless technology, in many ways, at least to me, really fulfills one of those initial promises of cloud computing way back when, which is sort of the idea that at the end of the day, I just want to write applications and I want them to run. I don't want to care about much else than that, because that's a lot to care about, especially with security and app design. So serverless is simply this idea of platforms I think function as a service is the less appealing name for the technology. The idea that you truly just upload code in a variety of different ways, and we'll get into the platforms and the tool sets allow you to do that. And the cloud provider, the platform too, which takes care of that. And this has really opened the door to completely brand new application design paradigms where you are truly thinking about simply application business logic, event-driven triggering type natures, which I think are secondary. And it's really just opened up a new way of developing apps, which in many ways fulfills all those ideals of cloud native. Now, I don't tend to think it's the only cloud native technology, but I think it is a really important one, and one that is really appealing when you have the benefit of being able to design something from scratch or completely redo something. So I think serverless is one of the most important elements of this cloud native idea that we're all living in. So I'm excited to get into it a little bit more.
Yeah. So I kind of defined this segment in the prep news as the good, the bad, and the ugly. So I take that actually, Taylor, from one of the things that as we were talking to one of our customers, where she was telling us about things that either worked and went really well, things that worked but didn't go so well, and then stuff you should just absolutely never do. So let's talk. So maybe Kent, I'll go over to you. And when you have seen, and you have the opportunity over at Microsoft and through your whole career to look at all sorts of transformations, what are some of those good practices? What works well when thinking about serverless transformation?
I think first and foremost, it is absolutely a requirement for you to rethink or refactor how you look at your applications and how you look at your workloads. I mean, one of the things serverless isn't necessarily greatly suited for is sort of long running, predictable, kind of consistent workloads, right? Yeah. And so you find people that it's like any other new technology. Oh, serverless, that's a new thing. Let's take our entire ERP system over here and put it in serverless, right? And we'll make one function, and Taylor's laughing here, but we've heard this story over and over again, right? And so that, to me, one of the best practices is you got to start to carve up your app, and you got to really think about it, because they really are, and I agree with you, Taylor, on the acronym FAS, functions as a service. But serverless is really about functions, about building blocks, about pieces. So I want to send an email. I want to pull a piece of data. I want to calculate a number. Those are perfectly suited for the function aspect of serverless.
Right. Right. Taylor, any thoughts on what works well when you see it work well? Even think about, it's a very public case study. So we can say one of our customers is Southwest Airlines, and you've been very involved in that whole process. But when we think about what works well, what in cloud in a serverless transformation works well?
Yeah, I think the other two, or maybe an extension of Kent's point, another one that we've learned from a number of our clients, and we've actually done some modernization talks, I think, in the past on this. Other thing is sort of, I think the pattern that you go into application design becomes really more important. And what I mean by that is things like your CI/CD pipeline, which I think is obvious. We always talk about that. The other thing with serverless, and we can get into the various frameworks, is I do think you need some paradigm and some framework. I think any of us that have been developers for any time in a pre-serverless world, not to sort of distinct the world as pre and post serverless, but before serverless existed, when you write an application, there are a lot of things that are kind of taken care of for you that maybe you don't think. You open up a project in your IDE of choice, and all the build dependencies and a lot of the libraries and the links, these all sort of happen for us. And they didn't used to, but they do now. In serverless, some of that goes away, right? You're really just writing functions. That's called functions as a service for a reason. You're writing functions. There's some abstract concept of libraries and class structures, and the programming languages still work like they're meant to, but you end up with a collection of a lot of functions. I mean, if you've written an app before serverless, think about how many functions exist in that app. You'll be blown away if you actually go look at, right? A simple app can easily have over 1,000 functions. Yeah. That's 1,000 things to manage in a serverless place. So that's one of the big pitfalls we've seen our customers really run into. Is they're like, to Kent's point, we're going to put everything in serverless, but even something simple, a web shopping cart for an e-commerce site, you don't realize how big and how intertwined that is until you try to do something like that serverless. So I think having some idea, recognizing that idea is going to be far from sufficient once you get into it, but having some plan to manage that and those core application things that we sort of just assumed are going to be there, I think that's really important. And then the other point I want to make was just, as Kim mentioned, I think the other pro that works well, or the opportunity afforded here, is break those applications up. I think that's a little obvious. We all kind of accept we have to do that. But also, it opens the door for applications that sort of can take different form. Your application doesn't have to be a serverless application. Serverless can be part of the application story. And some of those powerful use cases we have seen are on that exact trend. So those are two things that I think are really important before you start that journey that you got to think about.
Well, and just to jump on that real quick, when we think about that serverless transformation, we need to get away from the thought that we have to do it all at once. To your point that you just made, is that's one of the values I think in that, I don't like to call it lift and shift, but a move and improve. And once you get those workloads into your cloud of choice, now you can start to cherry pick things out and make them serverless, make them platform, make them whatever. But Ken, as we go through this, and I think Taylor sort of tagged into it, when we think about the good, the bad, the ugly of serverless transformation, when I think bad, getting the job done, but maybe not in the most ideal way, ending up with 1,000, serverless functions can be challenging. But what comes to your mind when you think about the bad?
Well, we already talked about it not being really for the long running kind of, heavy duty applications. I think, frankly, from a developer's perspective, I think we're still a little ways away from having what I would consider to be an elegant test and debug sort of scenario. I think the CI/CD pipeline, fits into that. We can do a lot of testing locally. So Azure Functions, for example, you can run the runtime locally and be able to test it locally. I think we still don't understand. We were talking about security earlier. I think we still don't understand all of the ramifications and the possible security exposure that we have. I think performance, in some cases can still be an issue. And then I'll tell you the one I hear all the time, it's vendor lock-in. If I go with Azure Functions, and we've been hearing vendor lock-in, right, since cloud started, some time ago, or for that matter, vendors of hardware programming languages. I mean, this is decades old. But the vendor lock-in thing can be potentially very real, right? You build an Azure Functions and it might be difficult, to move to something else, which is why we're starting to see more containerization of the FAS platforms, et cetera, to make that a little easier. Those are kind of my top list. And I can tell you that I think all of those, there are answers to them. I mean, Taylor touched on my big one, which is the automation, the CI/CD pipeline, the ability for you. I would never even go into serverless unless I had that substrate already developed. Trying to do it, I keep thinking about guys in Visual Studio hitting the publish button, I'm going to publish my function now. No, you're not. You're not. You may do that locally. You're not going to do that in production.
Well, let's talk then also about the ugly. What just should you stay away from? What are the problems? What are the landmines? What should you never do? And where have those failures been? So Taylor, back over to you for the ugly. Not that you're ugly, because you're getting all sorts of comments on
boy, how was that for an intro?
I felt that, Jeff. Gee. I think we've actually mentioned it, if not obviously. I think the biggest ugly from serverless is following that desire to make everything serverless, or the flip side, which is to throw something out if it can't be 100%. I mean, I keep harping on that, but that's where I've actually seen a lot of people fail. Either not embracing any version of serverless because the whole thing can't be that. I think you leave a lot on the table there. We see serverless sometimes also used in really legacy monolithic environments as a bit of a glue mechanism, which is really powerful. We had a customer that had a single application, and when it ran, it required something insane. Biggest instance of the time in Amazon, I think. So I think it's the X116X at the time, maybe 32X. It only needed it for 5 minutes. It only ran a few times a day. But the only solution at the time was to keep those servers on all day for it to wake up. So we used serverless just to invoke the thing and then shut the server down. Resulted in a 94% month-over-month cost decrease just by this little serverless code. But they'd originally thrown it out because we can't rewrite this long-running app, a big app in serverless. So things like that, I think, are important. To think about, to not throw anything out. The other thing I see is customers trying to mimic non-serverless application architectures in a serverless way. Sometimes it's to bypass that time limit. Other things I've seen done is, well, this wouldn't really work, but I realized that my serverless in Azure is running on a VM, and if I know enough about the VM, I can sort of hijack the file structure and like just do all, like I found a way to save to disk in serverless, and it's just like, what are you doing? And I think that's we see that across any sort of new technology. Containers aren't absent from that, but I think in serverless it can really hurt you. If you're trying to mimic a non-serverless application design in a serverless framework, almost every single time it's just not going to work. And I have seen customers spend a lot of time learning that lesson. So I think those are, for me, the real things that can absolutely destroy a serverless project and leave a really bad taste in your mouth from trying it out.
Okay, Kent, the ugly.
Not
the ugly Kent. Kent the ugly.
Taylor brought up a great point, and it is, and I'm reminded of a situation I was in not too long ago where I was looking at a serverless function, right, and opened it up, and I was asking a question about where the issue was, and they're paging and paging and paging and paging and paging through the code, and I'm like, well, I can tell you what one of your problems is right up front, right? You've got the entire application sitting in one function, and that really isn't the intent. And I really think the ugly is, it's well intentioned, right? I think it is, again, pretty shiny new thing. Let's go put everything into it. Kind of like when we discovered containers, kind of like when we discovered object orientation, relational databases and NoSQL. I mean, it happens with every technology. And Taylor, I think the mitigation of it, I love the fact that, we talk about this idea of move and improve, right? Let's get it up there. And then we start to use strangulation approach, right? To say that little piece of the application would be perfect for serverless because we only call it like 10 times a day. And it needs to be able to be quick, and we need to be able to spawn it, scale it up, et cetera. And I was just looking at a cost thing over here. I looked at one that I did a few months ago, 3 million executions in a month on an Azure function to do a fairly significant, kind of function, $18. $18 to execute it 3 million times in a month.
Yeah.
Now you say to yourself, yeah, but if I have 100 of those and put them in a VM, I pay less for the VM, but you're managing the VM, you're managing deployment of the VM, you got all that stuff going with you. And remember, so
it's not just about cost.
It is not. It is definitely not just about cost. The cost to procure and the cost to operate is one component of your entire cost structure. And we've talked about
even if we go back to our theme of the day, and that is to go back to security, to not have to deal with the VM and the security implications that come from that, and let the cloud provider deal with the security of the underlying service, provided it doesn't have a Cosmos DB effect, then it's worth it in spades.
Right.
Absolutely. All right. Hey, we're coming up on close to the end of our time. Our little chatters are not very chatty this morning. It's the what's on your mind section. But Kent, you were so kind to have jumped in on last minute with Eric Johnson not feeling well. What's on your mind, Kent? What has captured your attention in tech these days? And we'll just kind of give you the last few minutes to pontificate, if you will.
Yeah, the thing that is exciting me now is the convergence of so many things. And I think it goes right into what we've been talking about today. So the convergence of containerization and serverless capabilities and the idea of breaking the application up into manageable components. I think we have a tendency, I was thinking about this the other night, we have a tendency to see the high flyers, right? I'm sure Taylor, Jeff, you guys see the guys that are out on the front a lot of the times. And that's who the news reports, right? So if you go to the sporting news, as we call the trade rags, right? They would have you believe that the entire industry is doing all this stuff. The reality is that so many of our companies that we deal with are still laggards in this space. So there's so much ground to be gained for them in this convergence of these technologies. And the thing that I think is incumbent on us is to figure out a way to simplify the explanation of it, to simplify the implementation of it, which is why I love the things that Rackspace does as an example. Get in there, figure out how to make the thing practical, and quit worrying about it being a science experiment and start worrying about it being practical application. So, and that's just been on my mind for the last couple of weeks.
No, that's great. It's great advice. And, go back to the comment I made maybe halfway through, and that was there really isn't anything that you would want to do with technology today that couldn't be done with what exists immediately today. And it's just
absolutely
sort of what's there. Taylor, any parting shots as we start thinking about close up here today?
No, really nothing to add. I love that last point. I think that's exactly right. If you stop to, there's a million things you got to figure out, all this new technology, but the flip side is, from a creative aspect, anything you want to do, anything your business wants to do, there's a solution out there, and it's probably a pretty easy to use, cost effective solution. And I think that is one of the most exciting things about where we are today versus even 5 or 10 years ago. Those limits just aren't there. The struggle now is figuring out the best way to leverage them, and so I think that's so important and a great point.
Great. All right, gentlemen, thanks so much for being a part of the program here today. Hey, folks, this is going to wrap us up for today. Now, next week, I'll tell you, we are going to get Eric Johnson back here, provided that he is feeling better. And I'll show you his beautiful little mug. He does a live stream with AWS and Serverless World every Tuesday, I believe it is. You can see that on all the platforms, when I was specifically over on YouTube. So check him out. That's Eric Johnson, works for AWS. Great guy. I'll have him back next week. Also, if you have any questions or comments for us, you can always email me over here at Rackspace at solve@rackspace.com. I'd love to hear back from you. And producer Daniel will drop that in the chat for us real quick. And everyone, thank you so much for being a part of the live stream. And we'll be back next Wednesday at 8:30 Central Time with Eric Johnson. And look forward to seeing you then. Thanks so much.